Hey, we're back again, and we're going to talk about another one that this is going to be a long episode to discuss because there's a lot of history here. And I wanted to give a little content warning at the beginning that even though this is a completely child-friendly character in canon, and that I in fact see him as very asexual and touchables, but that's just headcanonville. You don't have to take that as canon or anything. I probably will be bringing up some themes of adultness in this because in order to discuss a character from Kingdom Hearts, I have to discuss the Kingdom Hearts fandom, and that's got some pieces into it that are well, they have to do with the different maturity levels of fans entering. We'll talk about it when we get there. But let's start I think it was like always predestined that I was going to be a Kingdom Hearts junkie because, I grew up on Disney. I also grew up on those fantasy books that were, a teenage protagonist setting off on a wild quest throughout many unique locations. And so, you give me a story of that where the unique locations are all different Disney worlds wrapped up into one big story that kind of, tickles the brain as this cosmic idea of what if more works of fiction had their own worlds in here. And I was already like toying with Disney crossovers long before then. I was a crossover fiend from the time that I was very small. I can't explain it. I just like imagining characters who've never met and who are from entirely different things. I like to imagine them interacting. And before that, before Kingdom Hearts dropped, I know when I was like 9 or 10, I used to try and script out what I would call the ultimate Disney movie, and it would have every Disney animated character up to that point. And it had a self-insert character in it for me, definitely. So of course, Square Enix went and did something that was a lot more epic than any of what I was doing in that realm. And it just absolutely blew me away with the first game. But the problem with the first game, and there are very few problems with it, but if there's a problem to be had with it, it's that none of the villains were really in my wheelhouse. Now, granted, I didn't really know how much I preferred villains by that age. I know Yzma was around, and that was a clue because Yzma was revolutionary. We'll talk about her later. But KH1 had the Disney villains, and they're iconic, and I love them in the sense that they're good villains, and they're classic, and they're fun to see do their thing, and they remind me of really good films that held my heart, but, a lot of them stop short of having that extra that makes me get all, squealy over a villain the way I would over, if you look at my past 3 episodes, the way that I do over Snatcher Roman and Mosenrath. There wasn't anyone like that in KH1. That game was for the heroes. That's where I adopted my son Sora and my daughter Kairi, and Riku took me a little while to come around to. He took until KH2, but then he became my baby as well. They're my kids, and I love them. So I was following it in real time. I grew up with this series, and I was 14 when I finished KH1, and I was 16 when KH2 dropped. And then, in between was GBA Chain of Memories. I did not actually play that one in that order. I played that one after 2. So that kind of got some confusion on me. But it was fine. It was still relatively understandable. The whole amnesia plot was probably done for that exact purpose, in case you didn't have a Game Boy. Later they'd try to pull that same device to make other interquels optional, and instead of making them optional, it just made them sad. Please stop. If you're going to do interquels on other consoles, do not end it with, and then everyone forgot about the character so you have all the context you need, because no one liked that. No one liked that. But in Chain of Memories, it was fine. The only character that really kind of got screwed over was Naminé, and then they immediately, fixed her story up in Cage 2. And I just accepted, here's this character who did something in an interquel that people have amnesia about, and since no one remembers here, I have as much investment in her as anyone else. But anyway, Cage 2 introduces its base-breaking original villain squad, Organization 13. Objectively, maybe they weren't the best idea when you already have Maleficent in the League of Disney Villains. I can't say I love all of them, nonetheless. Again, there's a lot of them that are just missing that oomph. But most of them I ended up appreciating to some degree. There's a whole lot of good villains there, and a couple good heroes that, had to work through. I'm on team bad guy. What does that mean? What do I really want out of life? But in 2, the first one to actually capture my attention was Demyx. And I'll have to do an episode on him later on down the line, way later on down the line, because he didn't exactly end up withstanding the test of time, even though, I felt so passionately for him at first. I kind of misread his character, but at the same time, I was seeing something in there I liked, and then later on his characterization would kind of change into what I thought it had been, and I have a complex relationship with him. I do love him. It's just a complex relationship. But, during my teen years, when I was 16, when all of this, he was the one that I was focusing all my attention on. And then finally, my best friend at the time, from my best guy friend from middle and high school, I made him a Cage addict. I did it. I'll take responsibility. But he and my mom collaborated so that for my birthday I would get a shiny pink Game Boy Advance, which it was a very beautiful aesthetic little gadget that I loved, and a copy of GBA Chain of Memories, because the remake didn't exist yet. All we had was the Pixel one. And, GBA Chain of Memories is, it's a toned down story. It's not as full or whole as the console games. I still enjoyed it a lot. And I think I actually enjoyed it more because having played Cage 2 first, I had the closure. I already know all these guys are going to have a happy ending, which is more than I can say for the other interquels. Again, no one liked that. Well, I mean, we liked it, but no one would have liked it if they just swept the characters off the board after that. We all clamored. But anyway, yeah, Chain of Memories, it's a fun little story. But it's villains. It's the other half of the organization that you don't get in 2, which, that's how I perceived it, when really it's the other way around. Chain was the organization's intro, and 2 actually filled in the rest of the ranks. But the Chain of Memories organization, they were very simple. There was no voice acting except for battle noises. They were text only. Their animations, they were just pixel sprites, so they didn't have, grand animations the way the ones in Cage 2 did. And so where Vexen comes in, I kind of just wrote him off at first because he had no voice then to speak of, except for his battle noises, which were kind of unfitting to his character back then. Not totally. They're not horrible, but the actor they brought in to do the voice just for the GBA, they could have done better. I've heard rumors that it was someone that they just kind of pulled because, hey, we need a voice, you're on set, can you do this? And that's fine, but I don't think it worked that well. And but I was, when I was younger, I used to be kind of mean to my villains. I was a little bit of a bully. I kind of like to joke on the voice clip that I didn't like about how high pitched it was, and that was mean. That was mean. I'm sorry, Vexen. Your voice could have been high, even in the remake, and you would have been extremely valid. But that's something I might touch on in a future episode, is how I kind of almost used to bully some of my villains for the exact same attributes that draw me to them to this day, mostly to do with them being, different. And I think it's kind of like me actually kind of liking and being interested by those attributes, but also knowing that it's kind of not societally the thing to like everyone around me who's into fictional characters likes guys with deep voices, so maybe make fun of the one who doesn't seemed the logical choice. And that was wrong, not only objectively, but in terms of me being able to figure out my own taste. Anyway, so yeah, I wrote him off. The only thing is his death has always fascinated me. If you've even been close to the Kingdom Hearts fandom, you've seen the GIF of his death in the remake. It's a very fiery explosion. And then in the GBA port, it's nothing like that, but I kind of think of them as equal but opposite. The one I consider canon is the explosion. And that's because I kind of consider the remake more canon in general, and because there's a whole entire subset of whammers that die by exploding mid-sentence, and I want to keep that energy rolling. But in the GBA port, which I know a lot of seasoned fans still haven't played, I call it a port, it was the original. What happens is that he actually gets to finish the sentence. He tells Axel, "I don't want to go yet," and he's on his knees, and Axel slashes through him from behind. There's no explosion involved at all. It's a lot more visceral. The fact that he gets to finish the sentence and it's, "I don't want to go yet," is just, oh, my WHAMP sensors are tingling. But I didn't know what WHAMP was, or that people could like it. So I had this total love-hate relationship with this scene, because it made me feel things. But then I'm like, it's a death. I'm guessing this emotion is sadness. And I concerned a few people with how broken up I would get over it, because it was just so wumpy. And being broken up is the only way I knew how to appreciate it, when now I realize, now that I write stories where villains always get a free resurrection pass, I'm just like, oh, that is a good wumpy death scene, and I'm going to juice so much angst out of that. I'm going to juice so much angst out of that. And I'm going to make so much hurt comfort out of that, you won't even believe. So anyway, but beyond that, he flew under my radar, mostly. I was writing little semi-quasi-crossover fan fictions in my downtime. Nothing really huge or ongoing, because I didn't know that fanfic was a thing. I didn't enter online fandom until I was 18. We'll get there. But if I was doing any KH villain rep, it was always going to be Demix. Always. He just stole the show. And so, we jump ahead to, I'm 18. I go off to college. My college roommate introduces me to online fandom. I don't know that I want to say the name of the fandom social media site that she recommended that I sign up for. But I'm sure you all can figure it out just from some context clues. There's parts of the story I feel weird about relating, because I know that people involved in it are still out there and can be listening to this, or, probably not listening to this. But if anyone is, oof. Just, here's a blanket, I'm sorry. Here's the thing, if I can borrow a philosophy from Men in Black, not that that's one of my favorite movies, but this is always the line I remember, is what they say about a person versus humanity. Another Kingdom Hearts fan, any other Kingdom Hearts fan, is fun to talk to and bounce ideas off. The Kingdom Hearts fandom is a cesspit of toxicity, and it still is to this day. Please don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It's fine if you know how to navigate it, but if there's one thing that annoys me most, it's this whole "there's no war in Ba Sing Se" mentality, with it currently, that there's no ship wars or politics, when in fact there are many, many, many conflicts, and even more than shipping, the two things that get discoursed about the most are the villains and all the mentor figures. And people can get a lot, very all or nothing about these things, me included. I am not exempting myself. I'm saying, as a Kingdom Hearts fan, like, I'm doing pretty well if I'm on my own and just bouncing off my people. Put me in the Kingdom Hearts fandom, and I've tried this twice now, and I become my worst self, and I recognize that that's, my own choices and my own doing, but ultimately the choice that is best for me, that allows me to get away from the most of this, is to just not engage in fandom social media outside of YouTube and AO3, because those platforms are more creation-based. Not so much that we're discussing our opinions, more so I'm putting out art, I'm looking at other people's art, and the focus is on the art, not the opinion. So I enter online fandom, and before I even knew what self-shipping was, I don't even know that self-shipping was so much a concept, because I hadn't heard the word FO at all in those days. This is, what is the year? This is 2008 to 2009. That's how old I am. But I basically considered Demix my fictional boyfriend, which is, he was my FO. He was my first FO before I knew what it meant. And, KH2 and Demix had kind of helped me through some depression stuff. I'll talk about that more in his episode, though, because this isn't about him. This is about Vexen. Couple years ago, Demix is my favorite, and I am so absolutely new to online fandom, and I am so absolutely green, that I messed up socially in a lot of ways. I know that I kind of bullied some people, and I annoyed a lot of others with my immaturity, and then in other cases, it was just two strong personalities butting heads. I know I would get angry a lot if people shorted my favorite characters on time, which was not fair of me, because, first of all, because it's not fair to make anyone do art of your favorites. And actually later on, ended up kind of harassing a semi-well-known YouTuber in the fandom. I'm not going to drop names, but harassing them because I wanted Vexen to have a larger role in their works. And I'm not proud of that. I'm really not proud of that. But the, where is my thread going? Where's my thread going? Because all of a sudden I think of another thread that I want to talk about regarding my greenness in online fandom. I didn't make all that many friends. I knew a lot of people, but I didn't make many friends. Do the math. Probably part of the problem was just not being exposed to this until I was 18. So basically, between that and my neurodivergency, the way I acted was more typical of like a 15-year-old entering online fandom. I'm sure that there are comments of me archived in Young People YouTube on Reddit, when in fact I was 18 or 19 when I made them. And that's not a point of pride for me. But aside from, making better choices in problem solving, I don't know how I could have chosen to be more mature, as in, more skilled in writing, more analytical in my thinking, less silly. I don't know that I could have chosen that yet. I think I still had just to wait it out until I was more into my 20s. And that's sad. Largely because I chose a really awesome name for my first account on the assumption I was going to use it forever. And I ended up having to ditch it because it was associated with that side of my personality. And now I'm JC Morrigan, which I love, but is infinitely less cool than the first name I picked out. I'm still salty. But the other thing about online fandom that was new and weird to me, the place where I think I tripped up the most, is when I first got into shipping culture. I was very much a child of the canon. I thought that if something said that two characters were in love, they meant it. I was okay with crossover shipping if the characters were single, and there was no canon love interest to have to stick to, because the rules are rules, I thought. But more so than that, it was kind of my first experience with the widespread of queerness in fandom. The way I had kind of been brought up. I'm from a town where there's not much openness about queer issues, about being gay, bi, trans, ace. It was just kind of assumed in my school that everyone was straight. I don't know that I ever met anyone who was openly out of any closet while I was in that high school or middle school before. There were some rumors. I don't think I had them confirmed. I think it was just like a really toxic environment that way, and that I ended up learning that there are some people who don't, fall for the gender on the other end of the spectrum and start copulating and having children. I learned that there were some other things. I learned that, not everyone wants to stay the gender that they're given at birth. And, I kind of accepted this, but I also thought it was rare. I thought it was the one in a million, when in fact, I'm sure that so many people I knew back then are now out of closets of all sorts, and I would have had no idea because our environment just was not conducive to it. This is not a great town to be queer in. So, when I'm in the online fandom sphere, so when I start getting exposed to the slash and the yaoi, and I went on the warpath against it for a while. It grossed me out, and I was honestly being very homophobic. And it's ironic given that, you see what I ship now. You see what I ship now. And even more importantly, I advocate, treat people nice in real life. No matter who they love, no matter how they love, no matter how they identify. Treat them nice. Don't be a jerk to them because of how they are. If you don't like their orientation in gender, sexuality, that's just awful. That's on the same level as not liking them because of their skin color. Don't do that. Don't do that. If you're gonna dislike somebody, it's gotta be for a valid reason, and that if they treat you bad. And I said this would be about villains, not politics. But any political view that I have right now just boils down to that. Be nice to people. If you must hate a person, make it for a legitimate reason to do with their chosen behavior, not with their identity in any way. So that's just, I'm mostly saying that to give you an impression of how much I didn't follow those guidelines back in ye day. I know I did dabble in working with the Queer Representation Club on my college campus, but I don't think I quite got it. I didn't really get it then. It was through meeting some other people, some friends who kind of opened my eyes and taught me a lot about the community that I first started realizing, just how widespread it is to not be straight, and unfortunately how widespread it is that people pretend to be straight to fit in towns like mine. So anyway, I'm freaked out. I'm freaked out by yaoi. That's the TLDR. But here's the other piece. I did not actually learn the true meaning of asexuality. I did not know that I was asexual until after I had graduated my 4-year. I was at least 23 when I came out to myself. So, looking back, it's stupidly, ironically hilarious that so much of what I hated when people would draw two male characters having sex is not, it is not that it is two male characters. It is that they are having sex. And I'm very repulsed, and honestly, coming out to myself and learning that about myself has made me more sex positive. Because now I learn, oh, the only reason it grosses me out is because I don't like it, and that's to do with my orientation. But it's perfectly fine for other people. Go ahead. So that actually was a breakthrough in not clutching my pearls anymore, is realizing that there's a very specific reason why this stuff gets under my skin. And to this day, I still don't like looking at fan art of anybody nude. It makes me feel like I've seen something I shouldn't. Doesn't matter the gender, the orientation, the anything. If it's a ship or if it's a solo, just keep their pants on, please, and use maturity filters so I don't have to see it, or else I'm just gonna get really embarrassed and kind of grossed out. And it literally does not matter what kind of body parts I'm seeing. If it's in that realm. And to this day, I do read saucier fan fiction now, and maybe one day I'll write it. But it's only really for ships that I'm way invested in. Like, I can't really. Well, okay, that's not exactly true, because there's one author who does some stuff with characters that I don't know that well, and I really like reading those smut fics. But that's kind of just because I like that author's style, and I like how they portray the situation. But for the most part, smut's a hard sell for me. I have to have some kind of investment either in the author or in the characters. And it has to be, like, I'm not saying has to be as in you as a person have to write it this way. I'm saying if you want to specifically get me, the Rachel, to come read your smut, it has to be very loving, very fluffy, very explicit consent, very good feels all over. And obviously not all smut should be like that. People should experiment with writing what they want to write. So, anywho, how this relates to the Kingdom Hearts fandom is there was a great movement regarding Organization 13, and it was comprised of two things. First of all, the idea that the organization was not actually evil, just misunderstood, because of some of the weirder context provided in KH2, and to be fair, there are several parts in KH2 that weirdly oversympathize the entire group out of left field, and like people who just want everything to wrap up happy with a bow, like I did, and people who are incredibly morally focused and don't think they should like villains, like I was, could very easily read subtext that potentially they weren't truly evil, even though their actions were definitely very evil. Just a lot of them would tend to get, Sykes died asking where his heart was and making you feel bad for him. And I think that's kind of one reason why I'm okay with him being a hero now, because he spoiled the sandbox for everybody else by doing that. And I'm like, it makes sense that you were actually a good guy, because you had to go and get all weepy when you died and act like you'd done nothing wrong. And then you ended up carrying that over and making us think that the rest of them were like that. But no, it was just you. It was just you this whole time, Sykes. Anyway. And then also there's that line that Naminé says, where she can't categorize them as good or bad. And, like, I guess now I kind of understand what that line was meant to be, because it was meant to say that Roxas and Axel aren't evil, that they are trying to figure out their way. But it could have been phrased a lot better, and I wonder if there was, like, a translation issue going from Japanese to English, because it really implied that Naminé was saying that they were morally gray people when their actions spoke otherwise. There was a dissonance between the tell and the show. So you get to the online circle, and most of us who, we want to like the good characters, we want to do emotional fluffy fic, we want to do the happy stuff. We took that and we ran with it. That no, they're not evil. They're morally gray, bordering on misunderstood. Except most people in this movement would go on to add, and Sora is a murderer, which always ticked me off, because even when I was standing the organization, I would never, ever, 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 ever want anyone to slander Sora. Like, he is too good. He's too pure. He's my favorite hero. Even if KH3 stumbled on him a little bit and temporarily knocked him out of my favorite hero position. But he's back. Don't worry. I still love him. And he's not a serial killer. Those were all self-defense. And I can break down why in each and every scenario if you want. Because I'm better at analyzing literature now. It's the other piece. Even though I was in college to study literature, I was crap at analyzing it. It took all 4 years to get me to the level where I was able to even analyze basic children's media. So, you have that going on. And then you have within this, there's a big slashing yaoi community. And this is one thing that kind of bothers me, is that people would use the terms interchangeably or use them for each other. And I guess there's still debate now over what exactly yaoi is supposed to mean in the original Japanese. Because when I looked it up back when I was 18 and green and naive, it was defined as PWP, between two guys. Porn without plot. And I'm like, ew, sex. Because I'm a baby ace in the closet and I don't even know that. So then people would keep on using the word for even when they were doing the big emotional relationships. And then that just was cognitive dissonance all over. It's like, wait, so are you saying that this is just physical favors, or are you saying that you're actually, doing the love story? It was very. And then some people would just be doing the PWP. There were a lot of fics that gained traction just for being hate sex, basically. The organization has hate sex with each other. And I don't like angst. At least I don't like angst that you can't turn into hurt comfort. I like when characters die in fiery explosions and then are resurrected and you can give them trauma, but I don't like when they're trapped in loveless relationships with people they hate. That is not fun for me to read. But again, I'm talking about my tastes, but I fully believe that, writers should experiment with all themes when they're writing, no matter what themes they are. It's a safe space to test things out, to see what you like writing about and reading about. So if you want to write hate sex and loveless relationships, I'm not stopping you. I'm just saying that I probably won't read your stuff, but go ahead and write it. There is an audience out there. I've seen it myself. So now that I've set the stage just for the organization fandom, Vexen, of course, he was kind of at the short end of this. There was an entire parody fic and several offshoots that talked about how Vexen, Zalden, and Lexius were often ignored because they weren't as handsome, which is lies and slander. Okay, I'll say Lexius isn't my type because I'm not really into the football framed guys. He is still very prettily animated. He's just not my type. But Zalden's hair is gorgeous. Oh my gosh. I want to play with it. And Vexen stunned me, okay? We're going to get to that because the TLDR is my crush on Demix faded and I ended up getting a crush on Vexen and it was horrible and I loved it. And to this day, I don't want to crush on him again. I don't want that again, but I do still think he's very beautiful, even in an unconventional way. Like, I know that he's, not as young looking, But he's got silky hair, he's got height on him, he's got broad shoulders, got a nice waist. If you catch what I'm saying, I'm asexual, but I have eyes. I have eyes. So, the only way that Vexen was really incorporated into this redeeming and shipping culture is as a satellite love interest to Marluxia, who always seemed to me the weirdest pick possible you could do for his ship. I get it, but at the same time, there's still a piece of it that eludes me, because what happens is Vexen and Marluxia are mortal enemies in Chain of Memories. One of them orders the other dead. That's the extent of it, and they're constantly trying to one-up each other and who's the smarter and more competent. But the thing is, though, that Marluxia doesn't even personally kill Vexen. So, I think even for a hate ship, it's missing the piece that would make the most sense to me. The physical, I stand in front of you, I throw my weapon at you, I watch you bleed out with my own two eyes, and I take pleasure in your suffering. That goes to Axel. Axel had that, and they're fire and ice, so they're thematically mortal enemies. I don't ship them, but I'm saying that as an enemy ship, that makes a weird amount of sense. I mean, maybe in some alternate universe where I like angst, that's my go-to. As of now, no. My actual ship, we're gonna get to the punchline. So, I'm still only really in the introductory stuff of this. But that the 411 ship, which is Marluxia and Vexen, because Vexen's number 4 in the organization and Marluxia's number 11, ticked me off so much because of all those things I said. How I was, different. It was different to me to do non-canon, to do enemy shipping, to do gay shipping, and people would always make porn of them. The big common depiction was that Marluxia is a horn dog, and that Vexen is very frigid and tells him to back off, but Marluxia doesn't know the meaning of no, which I don't really see where this comes from a canon perspective, because Marluxia does not have really anything sexual about him in canon. Just, he looks pretty, and he is very queer-coded. That cannot be denied. And I like that about him. Marluxia is not one of my ultimate favorites, but I have come to really like him. He's a good villain. Even if KH3 did give him that sympathetic backpedal that it gave just about everyone. Oh, we'll get there. But there's nothing about him in canon that suggests that he would stomp on people's sexual consent. That was just made up by the people who wanted to do the PWP. And that's fine, except I always felt kind of like the crazy person for being on the outside and being grossed out by it. And today I still don't like it, but I see why it's a thing. But I'm really not one for any that has to do with the sexual dynamic between the two of them. But all this means that, the fandom is doing the same thing I did. It's sidelining Vexen and pumping up characters like Demyx. Demyx was a big fan favorite, and kind of that's how I got into this same movement, as I got caught up in the groupthink, because I found other people that finally loved my husbando, and they were doing this specific stuff with the redemptions, and the fanfic that they spawned from it used tropes that made my heart happy. So I went full tilt. Really it was just my desire to have fluff tropes in general, and my desire to have my villains be happy that kind of conflated, and my desire to monkey see, monkey do, and not be a person who excuses the bad guys for doing bad guy things. Oh, past me would not be proud of my current taste, and present me is very proud of how horrified past me would be. If I get to the Gotham Villains episodes, 18-year-old Rachel will faint dead away. Um, but part of the reason that Vexen kept staying under the radar is because the fandom didn't really do much with him. You know, we were the Demic's echo chamber. And then the remake starts coming out around this time. But it takes a hot minute for it to arrive, and even then it gets released in Japan long before the US. And I have never played through the whole remake. I have never actually watched a playthrough of the whole remake. I've seen all the cutscenes, but I've never watched a playthrough of the whole Chain of Memories remake. I'm going to fix that eventually, because I'm doing a very long and slow rewatch of the KH series in chronological order. I'm in KH1 now. I've already done Birth by Sleep and Fragmentary, and it's been fun, kind of a spiritual revival of sorts. But it's very slow because I keep doing other shows in between. Like, I'll pause in between two worlds to just binge the entirety of Disney's Bonkers. I'm not kidding you, I did that. And you can trace a direct heroic genetics line from Bonkers D. Bobcat to Sora. You absolutely can. But back to the point. Chain of Memories remake, I never really got into until long after I'd moved into my next phase of fandom. So at this point, I was working off Pixel Vexen for a long, long, long time. And, you know, eventually, I don't want to, get into too many specifics, because that would involve names, and that would involve sordid things, and that would involve admitting a lot of mistakes. Just, again, a blanket, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was not a good fan. But let's just say that over time, I finally got worn down on the slash shipping thing. Finally. And I was able to admit, you know, I like shipping the dudes. You see this day where that has gotten me. And you know, that many gay people do exist in real life, which should sound like an obvious thing, but 18-year-old me did not frickin' know that. But the world is gay, so the fictional world may as well be gay as well. We just enjoy it. It's pride time. Except, you know, given my particular lens, I add more aces. But yeah, I get I start to get, you know, kind of on the board of maybe the slash shipping isn't all bad, so long as it just doesn't cut straight to the sex. Because I'm ace and I don't know it. And then just kind of hit me like a bomb one day as I'm looking at fan art of all 13 of them, going on 14, because 358 was in the works. It hadn't actually dropped for a while. But I'm looking at fan arts, and all of a sudden it just slaps me across the face that I've had Demix as my husbando for a couple years by this point. And all of a sudden, it's the Vexen fan arts that are looking too pretty for school. They're looking gorgeous. I'm like, this dude, this man, he's capturing me. What's happening? What is happening? It was an absolutely... If you know the song Nearly Witches by Panic at the Disco, it was an absolute, ever since we met, I only shoot up with your perfume, or your ice, I guess, or whatever. So that led to me really adopting the fanon version of Vexen, which is nothing like the canon one. And I didn't have much to cross-reference because, as I said, my Vexen was pixel Vexen. There was not voice acting to really dig into. The animations were limited. Even though his character has a defined personality, he is also relatively a blank slate in terms of how he puts across these personality quirks. And so that left the fandom a lot of room to do things. And then we added things that were not supported by the existing canon at all. And I was absolutely complicit in this. I'm not saying that, again, it's not that the bad people convinced me to do it. It's like, no, one Kingdom Hearts fan is reasonable, but the Kingdom Hearts fandom, you put us all together, we all start acting stupid. It's just how it is in this fandom. I can't explain it to you. If more than 5 of us are in a room, we're gonna start acting stupid. And so the Vexen, quote unquote, that I ended up liking was very soft, very parental, very, oh, not at all. Just not at all what he is. But also, very much a weakling. So, you could fawn over him, my wump senses. I wanted to go back to that death scene. I wanted to reclaim that. Eventually, I was just like using him as a teddy bear, basically. And along the way, I ended up temporarily shipping Vexen and Demyx because I decided that Demyx was the one I wanted to project on as a Kinney instead of FOing. And I wanted Vexen to be my new FO, except I didn't want to do the same thing I'd done with Demyx. I didn't want to make him my boyfriend. I wanted to make him boyfriend of the character that I'm projecting on. I don't know what drove me to make that switch, but it was whatever. And then I got in a couple role plays of this where I was probably the worst at fandom that I've ever been in my life. So specifics are really going to be glossed over and omitted here, but I was awful. And part of it is that even though I didn't yet know my identity, I personally was still working out a lot of what did work and didn't work for me, both sexually and sensually, which are 2 distinct categories, but they're related. They're relatives of each other. And so in some of the things that I read and wrote in fan fiction and in that realm, started exploring that. And I have some cringy things where you can kind of, if you know what to look for, you can tell what some of the things I was into were. You can read me like a book if you looked at my old stuff. And FYI, this old stuff is still up just because I feel horrible about deleting. I feel very Fahrenheit 451 about deleting that big of a library, even though it all sucks. It might have value for somebody, so it stays up. I'm not going to lead you to it. If you find it, just be nice to me, okay? And better yet, don't tell me you found it. Just laugh at it in secret on your own time. But, between my lack of social skills and the fact that I was using fan fiction as a realm to discover what made my heart happy and what kind of got me going, there's just a lot of shame in that era. It culminated when eventually I started having anxiety attacks. I don't remember what all specifically led to them, but I think it was largely triggered by 358 and Birth by Sleep dropping, and they were both angsty as heck, and then I couldn't find people who shared my opinions on them, and I was sad over Terra and Ven and Aqua. I was sad over Shion, and there was no support for me in the fandom because everyone hated Shion, and there was barely any support for me in the BBS side because no one would agree with me that Ericus was the source of all of the VAT trio's problems. And then in the meantime, I'm still on the organization side, and the longer these games go on, the less the canon supports what we're doing with the organization, and the stupider we look on the whole. We, me included, me especially. And eventually gets to the point where between everything that I've just said up until this point, all like 45 minutes of backstory I've given, culminated in me starting to have the anxiety attacks where even the mention of the KH series would give me physical panic symptoms, like nausea, and I noped out of the platform for good. I just ghosted everyone. I just posted one entry saying, "I'm gone, bye." And I didn't go back. And I was a horrible fan till the very end. And then I tried to cold turkey out of Kingdom Hearts as a whole. And from there, I always wanted to get back to it deep down. I didn't want to admit that, but I always wanted to be able to enjoy it where it wouldn't make me feel sick anymore. And so, I developed some coping mechanisms. I took out my anger on some of the characters. I did this whole AU where, for the Elements of Harmony fic, where Demix was going to be this ultra sociopath who plays everyone like a flute, and that actually, that's supported. That's not actually too far from what little we get of him in KH2. And that is kind of still something that feeds into how I see him to this day, but I've tempered it a little for his WHAM Army incarnation. Like, he's the silly guy, but underneath that, he's the cold and calculating one who could ruin you in 5 minutes if he wanted to. But right now, he doesn't want to. So just tread carefully. But Vexen, once again, he goes back under the radar. And once again, I'm focused on Demix again. I confide in some of my friends of how much embarrassment the whole Vexen thing caused me and the Vexdem ship. And then I just kind of drop it. Again, he was again slated to appear in Elements of Harmony as a character who only existed to cause trouble. He was going to be Twilight Sparkle's evil ex. He and Mosenrath are going to be bitter rivals over her, which is the most freaking ironic thing I ever came up with, because now they're best friends who are united in Twilight Sparkle annoys us. So you're wondering where it all turns around. How does this guy come into actually his canon self being one of my biggest character obsessions? And the key here is, as I've said, I did not have experience with the Chain of Memories remake until long after. For all 4 years I was in college, I was working on Pixel Vexen, the one who was the blank slate. So, a certain friend, whose name starts with G, and then with A, and then ends with villain, suggested. There was a time when I was finally feeling healthy about it. I wanted to get back into KH. I wanted to get back into the good parts of it. I wanted to use it. I wanted to fix some of the things I didn't like. I wanted to treat the villains like villains and the heroes like heroes. I wanted to finally just get back into this. We're going to do this. And GA is like, I know you have this complicated history with Vexen, but why don't you just try watching his remake cutscenes with the voice acting and see what that does? And either GA knew exactly what he was doing or he was as blindsided as I was. It was like discovering this character for the first time. The voice acting on him, the animations, when he's fully realized in 3D and with audio visuals. I had never known he was like this. His real role is he's the party pooper. He's the guy no one likes. He hates everything. He doesn't like anyone. No one likes him. He's very dramatic and angry about that. And that's funny as heck to me. And then he's kind of got that snatcher complex if he's always trying to become the most respected guy in the organization. He's like, look at me, look what I did. I did these amazing things. And truth be told, he is responsible for some of the most overarching consequences throughout the whole series. His invention of replicas is the entire reason we have 358-2, is the entire reason we have most of KH3, as much as that one stank. The replica thing was huge for the entire series. And anything that ever referenced Shion, you could thank Vexen for that happening. And I know the series doesn't make a big deal out of the connection between the two of them, but it always strikes me as pretty funny that when Shion dies at the end of 358, her body starts to crystallize into what looks like ice. I think there's a little callback going on there, a little narrative callback saying, don't forget who did this. So then, Vexen's the most entertaining organization member now. Like, he hits me as an adult the way that Demix hit me as a teenager. And he's just... I love it because he's so animated and so bombastic about just being the grump and the fun ruiner. But he's also the one who does these big things. But because no one likes him, the big things he does never get recognized by anyone in game. Like, they're all so eager to forget about his attitude. And it was just all new. It was all new to me, even though I had technically known this character for years. It was an absolute renaissance. And what made it even better was when I killed EOH and I started to work on TBTC. Of course, the breakthrough. It always comes back to him, doesn't it? Archibald Snatcher's the breakthrough character because, like, Mosenrath, Yzma, all of them, I'm like, I appreciate them because they're badass, because they don't have feelings unless I want them to have feelings, because I want to do tropes. But then Snatcher comes along. He's that perfect balance between the emotional piece and the ruthless, the villainy piece, the art and the theatricality of the villainy. And once he balances that, I can kind of get back in touch with some of the characters that I had assigned more of that sympathetic route. Kind of going back to, I had Vexen as my teddy bear for a while. And now that I've kind of combined some of the holdover feelings. Like, I had his characterization all wrong. But some of those feelings carry over. Like I said, the death scene. The death scene. And the fact that he's, always trying to get respect, but he can't get it. Either in the work of fiction itself or in the fandom. Again, the meta-narrative is too perfect. It's just, I can finally deal with the emotional piece along with appreciating the theatrics of him just being ruthless and irredeemable. Because Snatcher opened up that door. He said, Vexen, come on through. And the Red Hat Man has absolutely just screwed everything up in the best way possible. I love him. And I love Vexen too. I just had the revival. And when I was doing TBTC, I put the 8 whammers for the core that made the name, the WHAM Army. However, Vexen is absolutely the 9th core. I put him in early on a whim because I'm like, I want to see if I can really get back to liking this character the way that I feel is best for me. And is closest to how I perceive canon now that I'm better at analyzing literature. And he just snowballed into one of the most important characters in the entire story. He took over. We had Mosenrath as the party pooper, but then as Mosenrath gradually becomes more acclimated to shenanigans, he's like, you know what? I'll join in the party. Vexen's over here going, well, if you're not going to poop the party, I will. I'll be the grump. And he's just been wonderful for that role and kind of using him to stir things up. But also, like, I fully believe in my personal context, like, what I've done is basically I've given him a version of Organization 13 that's compatible with him. Like, when he was in Organization 13, I think he wanted the recognition. Maybe he did want companionship in the sense that he wanted people to tell him how great he was. And, of course, I've translated into that's how villain friendship works. You want people around you to tell you how great you are. That's how villains do friendship. And then you kind of get a little soft and you care about each other, but you don't say that out loud too much because you're villains. But he was trying for that in the organization. No one would give it to him because he's awful. And he comes over to the WHAM Army, where people are just as grumpy, cynical, loud, and angry as he is. Except some of them also like to do karaoke and drag. And now he's with his real people. I've given him an Organization 13 that's better. Here's my secret. The entire WHAM Army is me doing what I wanted out of Organization 13 fanfiction. Because what we were doing back in the day, it wasn't canon Organization 13. They were not a set of villains that was built to get along. And in the end, it was proven that their downfall was that they were unable to harness the power of friendship the same way that Sora could, or even, Roxas, Axel, and Shion managed to do so much revolutionary stuff because they were the only three in the organization who reached out and made those bonds with each other. And then, later, Syx had to come to terms with this too. And so, the WHAM Army is me creating a new Organization 13 that's like, no, I'm taking the villains who actually would be entertaining to write as a funny roommate family AU where everyone ships and they kiss, but I don't write sex. I don't have to write sex. It's my story. It's my story. Except I think one day, kind of my goal is one day I will put in something a little saucier just for Snatcher and Roman because I love them. And they're practically married at this point, so they deserve to have something written as a honeymoon, But at any rate, at this point, I've fully gotten him back, or so I think. KH3 finally drops. It's a load of crap, but not totally. There are parts of it that are really fun. I really enjoyed playing through the Disney worlds. There was getting to interact with the Toy Story cast that's just pure childhood fun. And let me tell you, we've traded up even more because how I said KH1 didn't have any villains for me to latch onto. KH2 gave me Demix, who I strayed from and then I came back to. Chain of Memories and its remake gave me Vexen, and he's my number one now. Even though I have Demix back in my fold, he can't touch Vexen. Vexen is just, he speaks to me more. It's, that fight for respect. It's the bombastic anger. It's the big animated personality. But, I have two now. KH3 did me one more favor, because it put in one of the Disney villains that I actually did get that way about, and that's Randall from Monsters, Inc. And even though we didn't get to boss fight him, I almost don't care, because the factory takeover is one of the best things in the entire Kingdom Hearts series. There's an entire level that's you going through the Monsters, Inc. factory, and Randall has taken over it, and he's Gladysing you over the PA as he's sending death traps at you. This is not Randall's episode. I'm going to shut up about him. Problem was, I'd spent the entire hype train. They didn't publicize very early on how many organization members were going to return. It took me forever until I got a trailer that had Vexen in it. Actually, there's one more piece I should tell you before I do this. This is the downside of unscripted. In TBTC, I still said no to the past. When it comes to shipping, I'm going to move Vexen forward. So I paired him with Ravis from Stormhawks, because they have, a lot of surface similarities, the ego complex and all that. The poise and the grace. I was like, this is the home. This is where I make my nest. This turned out to be a mistake. But KH3 finally drops a trailer that confirms that Vexen will be coming back and shows part of the scene of him talking to Demix. I'm like, wait, it finally made those two friends. No, I don't care. No. Water off my back. So I'm playing KH3, and I've managed to go completely spoiler blind by yelling at everyone around me not to give me any spoilers. If anything, this was an exercise in learning that spoilers are not necessarily bad things, because I wish I'd been braced for some of this. The first half of the game is really top tier Vexen content. It's exactly what I came in for. During the second act, it is then realized that he has been faking being evil for the duration of KH3 so that he may secretly help out the heroes from the other side. Because when he regained his heart, apparently that made him a good person, and he just stopped being angry and hating things altogether. And when he does the reveal, he looks and acts nothing like himself anymore. To the point where I saw that scene, I went back into my group chat and I go, I can't believe they killed Vexen again! He might as well have died, except for one scene later on that can stay. But he might as well have died. It was horrible. And the thing is that I know that most of the fan base actually really liked it, because I saw the aftermath when I was on my Tumblr blog. And again, the Kingdom Hearts fandom, as individuals, we are good, fun, creative people, but as a group, we are a cesspit of toxicity, and so, like, it felt like there's no room for me when people like the Vexen Redemption, as they're perfectly allowed to do, and, like, if it struck them, that they should be allowed to play with it, but then I felt like I was crazy being the only one who was like, does anyone still want to play with the evil version? Anyone? But then again, no one ever did. Like, he was one of the least popular. It was only on this Redemption that people really started liking him, and I'm a little suspicious, because back in the day when I first joined the fandom, there were all these jokes that Vexen was a dirty, pervy old man. You know, when they weren't making him frigid to Marluxia, and they, like, couldn't make up their mind. Either he was a perv or he never wanted to do the do ever. And so, over time, as I'm reclaiming him, I realize he reads asexual to me. And maybe part of that is, like, you know, the whole idea of the frigid, which he literally is. He's ice elemental. And kind of, it's a term I kind of like reclaiming. Because, you know, the gay guys have flaming. I think we aces should have freezing. I don't expect you to jump on this bandwagon, but it's one of my personal words I like reclaiming. It's like, yeah, I'm freezing. I'm frigid. I don't do it. Ace pride. But also, you know, he just strikes me as a character that doesn't even like being touched. He strikes me as very, very jumpy, very get off me, very keep your distance. And I'm like, and he definitely doesn't do it. He just doesn't do the do. He just doesn't have that attraction. He is, you know, he's done surgery on naked bodies before, and it means nothing to him. He's a biologist, and it's purely scientific. And that has just felt right. And only after KH3 did I see some other people start to jump on this bandwagon. I'm like, interesting that he's only asexual when he's not a villain. But at the same time, I know that if that moment was what struck and resonated with people, that I can't really knock them for that, because it's in the same way that villain Vexen resonated with me. So I'm kind of a hypocrite for saying that that's at all incorrect. So here we are, just in this limbo, where we all have different opinions that are clashing into each other, and some of them become more groupthinky, and some of them don't. And it's just not a good recipe. So eventually I walked out of the Kingdom Hearts online fandom a second time. Like I said, I'm just talking about those games with my close friends, and I'm making fan fictions to show off. I'm making YouTube videos to show off. I am not engaging in opinion debates on it with anyone that I barely know anymore. I'm not joining the group. Just because as individuals, we are fun, we are creative. As a group, we get stupid. And anyway, this whole thing, you know, kind of with the meta and the canon both going like, oh, you know, he's not evil anymore. That didn't happen. My faith in him shook a lot. And it was like going through Discord from My Little Pony all over again. I'll get to that story in another app when I get to Discord. The only thing, though, that keeps me from writing the KH3 plotline for him off entirely is that scene they put with Demix, because let's go back to talk about kind of other reasons why I'd come to like the Vexdem ship over the years. Because, you know, originally it started as me trying to project on Demix while I had my thing for Vexen, and there you go. But, you know, over time I started to get like, you know, technically they both control the water element, just one is frozen and one is not. They're both the team losers. Chain of Memories half is Vexen is the one no one respects. And in the KH2 half, Demix is the one that probably no one respects, and he is most likely sent to die on the front lines at Hollow Bastion. I mean, that was never confirmed, but I think we all know. Xemnas was just tired of him, and it was like, yeah, definitely go fight the guy who's been wiping out our nobody armies. 1v1 him. You will be fine. Oh, thank goodness I don't have to hear that sitar anymore. So, always there is this connection of the two of them being the losers. I realize that there is a significant age gap between them, but they're both adults, and it's basically the same gap as Marluxia. If you take his physical age and not his Union Cross age, which I don't like that Marluxia was thrown into the prequel era, because that's they joke about Kingdom Hearts lore being complicated, but mostly it's just continuity. You have to keep track of continuity. It's not an anthology series. But the Union Cross stuff is where they actually started making it weird, because it's like, what if time travel and one of the minor villains from the current era used to be in the past by 1,000 years or so and was not a villain at all, but he acts shady, so we can have a red herring for the murder mystery. And that's the point where you're just making things up to have plot twists. This is Tetsuya Nomura should not have as much creative control as he does on the series right now. Like, I've looked at this. It is only during the Union Cross and KH3 era that he started to actually take over as lead writer. Before, he was only producer, and there was a crew of other writers that would return for most every game, some that rotated in and out, and mostly we have them to thank for all the good stuff. But Nomura himself decided to tie the brand to himself because of the Final Fantasy Versus 13, and now we're apparently getting Final Fantasy Versus 13 in all of its glory, but with Sora instead. Boy. That has nothing to do with Vexen. The point is, if you are okay with 411, then there's nothing bad about 49 or Vexdem. And like I said, as long as they're both adults, it doesn't matter anyway. But also, I'm a big hypocrite because I also kind of paid Temix Immortal in the TBTC verse. I had it. He wasn't from Union Cross era, I swear. He's not the Master of Masters. He's an Atlantican who was from Triton's generation, is actually Triton's younger brother. And what happened is Triton found some particular topside human legends about other supernatural creatures, and one day when his little brother is annoying him too much, Triton goes, "I wish the Goblin King would take you away," and see what I'm doing? This is how I explain all of the Labyrinth references in Demix and canon, as I say that he was kept in time stasis in the Labyrinth, which makes a lot more sense to me than whatever Nomura said about Union Cross. But Vexen's pretty straightforward for me. I have my backstory for him. I think he and Ansem were childhood friends. I think they grew up together in Radiant Garden. I think slowly Evan became more and more like, pay attention to me. Don't reject me. Stop having a conscience when I'm trying to do science. Don't tell me I can't do science. No, don't marry someone I don't love you. No, I sure don't love you, but we're friends, and she's not more important than me. And again, he kind of brought it on himself by wanting to do unethical experiments when Ansem clearly didn't want people to suffer. But I think that Vexen still blames Ansem for the decay of their relationship. And again, that's headcanon town. And I also think Bragg was part of their initial friend group too. The timing makes sense on that one. So technically, I think among Organization 13, I think that Vexen and Xigbar are the ones who probably knew each other longer than anyone else in the group. Because I don't count Union Cross as canon. It's not canon. Strelitzia exists because I love her, but the entire game is not canon. So, as all this happens, yeah, this is me taking forever to get back to the point. The point is, the Vexen ship, I threw it away. I threw it away because of all the shame. KH3 proved that they're amazing together in chemistry. I'm not sure how we don't have a Vexen revival after KH3. Like, a lot of people went back to 411 and recontextualized. They took out all the Horndog Marluxia stuff, which I was happy about. I mean, like, again, if that's your cup of tea, definitely write it. But it's not my tea. It's tea I don't like. But a lot of people, revived 411 and used their current personalities, even though they didn't interact in 3. They didn't talk to each other one bit. No, it was Vexen and Demyx who had this scene where they play off each other. And, like, you can tell that Vexen normally thinks he's so much smarter than Demyx, but then they have to shush each other for getting too loud, and you realize that they're the same brand of stupid. They're the same brand of street stupid. They're both smart in their own ways, but they're dorks. And Vexen knows exactly how to motivate Demyx into wanting to do something, is by stroking his ego. And I think Demyx knows this about Vexen too, because Demyx is a little bit of a manipulator. And it's just... The chemistry is flying. It took me so long to realize I wanted that ship back. A lot of the drama I even had about Vexen's redemption was I wanted that ship back. But I didn't want to admit I wanted that ship back. And today it's one of my top ships. Like, frustrates me that it's such a rare pair because I want more content of it. Might even read smut of it, but I will not read redemption. I just want them to be evil. So if you're out there and you've written evil era Vexdem, hit me up. I want to see them ruin Sora's day together. It's just they go together in my mind. And like that's not the only ship I have for Demyx. I'll maybe talk about that later, but like in the WHAM verse, that's just those two are important to me, and they were the two who were most important to me on separate occasions, and so I really deserve to honor them by putting them together. So I think there's a little bit of me in Vexen. I think that I have that kind of inferiority complex masquerading as a superiority complex. I think Vexen is definitely the proof that Organization 13 did have hearts and emotions all along. Not because he was in any way sympathetic, but because he got so angry that you could not in any way say that this man couldn't feel emotion. This man knew what anger was. I think KH3 did him way too dirty by just taking away everything that made his villain self fun. I refuse to accept it. The only thing I accept is that it gave me back the ship that I wasn't mature enough to handle back in the day, but hopefully I am now. Hopefully. Now that I've quit this fandom twice, but not quit the actual games themselves. I mean, I guess I'm still carrying on the fandom myself by doing this and being a fan. I am the Kingdom Hearts fandom, but I'm not the main one. The main one is the majority of people. You know what I'm saying. I hope you know what I'm saying. But if you're ever considering getting into Kingdom Hearts, I suggest going very slowly when it comes to going in the online fandom. Know your boundaries. Know what you are and aren't willing to put up with. And don't be afraid to just dial it back and talk to your friends instead. Like, that's where I found the most happiness in this series. It's just talking with my inner circle, like GA Villain, Mr. Dark, Woe Freeman, History Buff, where, we're friends anyways, and so we share our headcanons, we share our theories, we share our fanfics, and yeah, as a matter of fact, I do write Primarily Kingdom Hearts stuff because it's a great crossover setting. But I have also written a rewrite of 3 that would be my ideal game to play. It does have Mosenrath in it. That was part of my excuse for even doing it in the first place. But it portrays Vexen how I would have wanted to see him, as a still a ruthless villain, but maybe more on the lighthearted end of, like, not that he's incompetent, but kind of the comic relief in that while Xehanort's doing all this big stuff in the foreground, and you have Vexen messing around in the background, and she's buddied up with Demyx, and I am absolutely gonna post that in the description when I upload this baby. So, in the end, I guess I first, ignored Vexen because there was somebody else shinier and brighter. And then I grew to like a shadow version of him that wasn't real. And then all of a sudden, it turned out that even though I'd known about him for all these years, when I really, really went back to him in canon having this audio-visual portrayal with these grandiose gestures and this amazing voice acting, it turned out that I could definitely fall in love with the character for the first time, despite knowing him for 10 years. And definitely this also has taught me that the social environment you're in surrounding characters can affect your relationship with them a lot. So, like, in the end, it's better to seek out the people that you like and share your characters with them, and not worry so much about clout chasing in the big scheme of things, or fitting opinions, or stating the dissenting opinion loudly enough that people might get converted. It's not worth it. It's just, something you should share with the people you care about who care about the same fiction as you. And it took me 2 tries in this fandom to realize that that trying to clout chase among the grand scheme was just not going to work for me. And so, I'm back to my roots. Like I said, I'm rewatching the games in chrono order and getting to love them as they are. And from here on out, they're probably never going to do an evil Vexen again. It's probably going to be the boring Evan who is reformed. But I don't know, he's fake. He's fake. He's not real. That's the replica. I know it. I know what the real one is like. Just because he got a heart back doesn't mean he'd be nice. It would mean he would get angrier. And that's what I love about him, is the fact that he's the worst. He's the worst, and I love him so much for it. And, yeah. At any rate, this is why it's probably a good thing that most of my villains are side characters or under the radar, because communities are weird. I think that, I feel like there was one concluding thing I wanted to say, but I've already been here for 1 hour and 15 minutes. You probably want to go home. You probably want to go to bed. So I will cut off here, and I will say that, I've had such a long history with this man, and it feels like he and I are in it together. So, yeah. It's kind of amazing how sometimes even the characters who aren't the number 1 in your list are the ones who you have the longest and most convoluted history with. And ultimately that's why he had to come home to me, because he'd been such a part of this for so long that, eventually I just had to let him come back and nest where he belonged. And I had to give Demyx that same grace in time. And, finally this means that that Kingdom Hearts has rogues that Our whammers. It's the two of them and Randall Boggs. Yay!